Today, we're talking about an article that you wrote. A robot stole my internship. How Gen Z's entry into the workplace is being affected by AI, which, of course, who doesn't love that title? So let's just get to the heart of this article. Are we witnessing the death of the entry-level job? And what does this mean for Gen Z's future in the workforce?
That's a big question. That's a big question. It's a good question. I think we're definitely witnessing a major transformation of the entry level, major transformation. So if we look at AI and like what AI is doing in the workplace right now is it's automating, or we use AI, I should say differently. We use AI to automate things, right? And a lot of the work at the entry level is work that can be automated. So if you think about AI's most initial impact, it's going to be there, right? I don't think it's going to be completely gone, but I think it's going to be a lot smaller. There's going to be fewer roles available, and it's going to be much more competitive for people to get those jobs. It's already very competitive. It's going to be more competitive to get those jobs in the future. So again, I don't think it's going to be gone, but it's going to be really different. And let me give you an example. Someone explained this to me this way, and it was the best way I could understand it. Imagine you're working at a call center, okay? You do, I don't know, it's an email call center, let's say, and you do, I don't know, 100 emails a day. All right, let's say that that's what your capacity is. So you have all the people next to you to get all those emails answered. Let's say you get 800 a day and you do 100. So math, folks, you need what? 8 people to do the job, right? But in the future with AI, future also being like now and tomorrow, like we're not talking months and months away, right now, if they automate, one person might be able to do, I don't know, 400 or even 800 of those emails, right? So that means 7 people would no longer be required. So it's not like all that work is being gone. It's that you don't need as many people to do it because AI does a lot of the heavy lifting. And when it was explained to me that way, I was like, oh, I totally get that. That makes a ton of sense for me. So that's how I like to share it to others.
Is there certain fields, and we're also talking about kind of Gen Z people that are in university right now. So is there certain fields or majors that you think are going to be a lot more automatable than other majors or other fields? Like you just gave the example of a call center.
Yep.
But that's one subset of.
That's one subset. Exactly.
Right. So like, what would you say are some of the ones that are like the call centers that are actually automatable? And then what are ones that are the opposite that are really hard to automate?
Oh, excellent. So you're asking about like which skills can be replaced by AI versus which ones are a little bit more AI resistant, right? So the skills, I actually don't talk as much about what roles. I'll give you role examples, but I like to think about it as skill sets because roles are going to change a lot in the next 5 to 10 years. Or even if they don't change, the skill sets within those roles will change. So let's talk about it as the skill sets that build up the blocks to the role. So I would say roles that require skills that are highly like automatic, programmable, and that those roles are the ones that are at higher risk. So like, for example, office support, calendar management, all that kind of stuff. Project management can be automated. Basic creative work can be automated. So junior creative folks, that's an area where AI can do it probably faster, probably better, right? I would say like paralegal type work, basic research type work, like anything that can be done faster or better with AI, that subset of work is likely going to get programmed by AI, or AI is going to do it in the next, I don't know how long. Could be as early as like tomorrow because it's already happening. So think about that. Like if your role is heavy in those types of activities, your role is most likely going to be, impacted, or there's a really high chance your role is going to be impacted, completely deleted or completely changed. So people need to get ready for that. The opposite of that are what we call AI resistant skills. So that would be things like emotional intelligence, right? Often undervalued, but extremely important in a lot of places. Complex critical thinking, like it can do basic critical thinking. It could do basic anything within parameters, but complex, when you start adding unknowns and parameters that are a little bit not as clear, it can't do that. It can't do the interpersonal and the collaborative work and ethical judgment. Unless it's trained, it's going to struggle in that space too. So those are things that if your job description or your day-to-day work is more heavily in those areas or requires those in a meaningful way, they're a bit more resistant. So that's how I encourage people to think about to look at their own roles and their own skill sets versus AI to see how at risk they are.
You're a marketing lecturer at a university in Canada. So, what interaction do you have with students? Is it mostly like marketing majors? You teaching like kind of some other general education courses? And what's kind of like the general vibe of these students that are getting close to graduation and wondering how this is going to impact their job prospects?
Yeah. So I do mostly marketing students at Laurier, but I do teach outside of marketing as well. I teach in a couple other areas, and I've been teaching for quite some time in a whole lot of different fields within business, not just marketing. And I would say, generally speaking, there's sort of like a fear that AI is going to reduce the number of roles available, but that's adding to the current fears that those students have around getting their first job. So it's sort of compounding on top of the fears versus bringing a whole new set of fears, because they're already worried about getting a good job coming out of school. Now they're more worried about getting a good job coming out of school. So they're putting more focus, more time on their application, their search. They're trying to get more strategic and all that kind of stuff. But in the classroom, though, we're starting to embrace AI. Every school is different. Every department's different. Everyone's trying to figure it out. But embracing AI and teaching students how to embrace it in an ethical way is super important. Because otherwise you're sending them out there with no real knowledge on how to use it properly and ethically. You don't want to do that. You want them to know how to do it right.
In preparation for this podcast, I was doing some research and I saw some titles like 92 million jobs will be replaced by 2030 with AI. And this was coming from a World Economic Forum or a WEF, the Future of Jobs report for 2025. But at the same time, what I found to be interesting that these videos and articles didn't talk about was that if you actually read the WEF report, it says that they will gain 170 million jobs. So you have 170 million jobs created, 92 million that are lost. So basically it says there's going to be a net of 78 million jobs. And this, of course, is global. So people are freaking out, like, oh, all these jobs that are being taken away. They never talk about the jobs that are created. Like most technologies, more jobs are created than destroyed. So if we have a net of 78 million jobs, where do these 78 million jobs go?
So the way to think about it isn't as much as all these jobs are going away. It's that there's going to be a major reshuffling of the type of work that's available out there. And that's likely going to look like a very big retraction of that entry level and a big expansion in other areas. So the other areas, at least at this point that we're looking at, one is energy production, because we need energy, good, clean energy as a starting point. But the AI requires a lot of energy. A lot of energy. And as we expand more into using AI, we need to have more energy. So that's an area. Cybersecurity will continue to be a big area. And I think that's going to be an area of growth. Engineering, we talk about software development being something that's going to go away. They're actually calling it opposite. No, they're going to need more people in software development to train properly and make sure the right protocols are around what they're building. And then creative design, which is weird. You wouldn't think of it that way, because you would think, hey, I can just go on, any AI site and get some creative made, right? They do good images, good videos even. But the strategic element of creative design and how to tie it to, let's say, marketing strategy, for example, or general narrative storytelling in a meaningful way that captures nuances of, society and all those types of things. That's something AI can't do. So those are the types of work that we will likely see expand in the future while that entry level is getting smaller. That's a big divide. It's a big divide.
Just your kind of personal belief, where do you see Gen AI and different LLMs and this AI technology, like how much you think it's going to progress in the next 10 years on, say, a scale of 0 to 10? Because there's people that think it's going to be the most disruptive technology in the history of mankind in the next 10 years. And other people think what we've seen now is basically the peak of it. So where would you put yourself between right now, we're kind of at the peak, minus some incremental adjustments, or versus like, we're going to have AI lovers and robots and 10 years? Where do you find yourself in that spectrum?
Okay, I'll give a personal belief because I don't think there's quite enough data out there to say exactly where it's going to be. My take or my thought is I don't think we're at the peak. I think we're just starting to move our way up. You're getting some early adopters now. We're not even at the mainstream AI usage space yet, not in a meaningful way. So I think we're just getting started, and you could see that by some of the industry characteristics. Tons of little startups starting everywhere, lots of them going dark after just a short amount of time, getting gobbled up by the biggers. That's very consistent when new industries show up, right? So it's following all the traditional patterns. You would expect to see what we're seeing right now, but that is at the early stages. That does not indicate that it's gone anywhere close to maturation yet. So if you ask me, in 5 years, we're going to be starting to talk about, if not already start talking about, the robotics element of it and getting AI to permeate into other areas that we haven't been successful in doing so far. Like, I think it's just ramping up, I guess, is my summary. I think it's going to get quite a bit more interesting before it reaches some level of stability as an industry.
On a scale of 0 to 10 on how impactful AI will be in terms of like inventions of humanity,
Yeah.
where would you put yourself on this scale?
Like, where would I think it's going to be? Like, where do I think yeah.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it's going to be like over 5 for sure, probably closer to that 8 stage. It's going to be pretty high in my opinion. Now, when I say that, I mean its impact versus human impact, the amount of work it does versus human. There should always be somebody behind the robots, right? Giving it direction, putting the parameters in there, specifying what it needs to do. But it can do a lot. And one of the thoughts in my mind that I see over and over again is this element of exponentialism, where let's say you start with one robot and you ask that robot to build another. And those two robots, you ask them to build two more. Now you got those robots build four more, build, build, build. So you could see how it could take on some level of exponential growth rather quickly, simply by the fact that it can double itself really quickly. And it does that. It could do it with robotics. It can do it with its own knowledge. So I think it's going to be quite substantial.
So back to your article, a robot stole my internship, how Gen Z's entry into the workplace is being affected by AI. What are some of the other areas that Gen Z's entry into the workplace is being affected by AI that we haven't discussed yet?
Like, what do you mean by that?
You're talking about kind of entry-level jobs, getting internships as being kind of more difficult because it's being offloaded to AI. But then, the title's kind of broad, like, the whole workplace is being impacted by Gen Z. So what are some of the other impacts that don't have to do with internships and entry-level jobs?
Oh, great. So that's a great question, but I will answer related to the lack of entry level jobs because I think there's an important consideration that we haven't talked about, and and it's something I'm actually researching separately. It's what is the impact on mid level skill sets, or the expected impact on mid level skill sets of people 5 years, 6 years down the road from now? Because I think we think of entry level jobs as a really, great starting point for people. They get to get their feet wet, they get paid, and they get to start learning and moving their way through companies, right? But there's a lot that people learn in those entry level jobs that aren't necessarily broadcasted. Like, for example, they learn how organizations work. They learn how to get things done. They learn interpersonal skills. They learn how to prioritize organizational versus their personal, you know, priorities and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that they learn that if they are not able to get that entry level type work, they won't have that skill set, meaning it would be a little bit more difficult for them to continue to progress. And another thing I heard, I'll just share this one with you too, is just a little bit bigger than the topic at hand, is if you think about it, with fewer entry level jobs available, that means there's fewer folks that are going to be able to break through and move their way through to those bigger roles, right? It also means that the poor is getting poorer, the rich is getting richer, right? There's going to be people let go. They won't have jobs. Then there's going to be the people who are saving money from letting those people go, and they're just getting richer. So that divide is going to likely we'll see some impact to that as a societal impact from this situation.
Recently, we've seen a lot in the news about how recent college graduates kind of have this higher unemployment rate, and I'm on right now the Federal Reserve Bank of New York showing this data, and basically right now, the last data I see is June of 2025, that the recent college graduates unemployment rate is like 4.8%, which is the second highest of all the other demographics, which would be all college graduates, young workers aged 22 to 27. So they're second lowest, only behind the young workers. So the young workers, those are without a college degree. But if you just kind of look back in time, a lot of people that graduated around the great financial crash and somewhere around 2008, I mean, the rates were quite a bit higher then. They were well over 6%. Some years they were close to 8%. So basically double what we're at now. If you're
That's a
talking going
lot,
back,
yeah.
right, going back to 2011. So part of me thinks we're entering into a bad economy, which is why the unemployment's a little bit higher. I mean, it's still, like I said, half what it was in 2011, which is still fairly low.
Yeah.
And then you factor in at least the end of the ZIRP, or the zero interest rate era. I mean, that kind of ended in 2022. And then especially the tech sector, which the tech sector gets focused on a lot because they're higher paying jobs. And
Yeah.
I think they, maybe they're more tech savvy. Maybe they have more social media presence, but there's just too many tech workers, basically. Just between 2018 and 2023, you're talking about 628,000 graduates in the US of tech degrees. And just to give a little perspective, in all of the US for computer programmers in 2023, there's only 139,000 jobs. So like you have basically that graduating a year. Now, granted, there's, software developers and there's other fields, but
Yeah.
when you're talking about 130,000 people graduating in a year, and that's more than there are, or the same as there are computer programmers. There's just way too many of these people graduating. And then secondly, you can offshore a lot of these jobs to people in India for cheaper. From my friends that work in tech, they think a lot of it's more, there was an overhire during the pandemic because everyone was stuck at home. Then they just started laying people off. Then the interest rates started going up. So that meant that they had to let more of them go. And then they were offshoring part of it. And then people look at the tech sector as a reflection of the whole economy, of course, but it's not. It's a small part
It's a small, yeah.
It's a small part.
Well, I would probably first start by saying that maybe more so the implication, I think, of what folks I'll start with that. Like, what are a lot of people in the tech sector are going to be looking for jobs. There are going to be fewer, especially in the tech sector, right? But they're going to be more specialized. They're going to be more niche. So what I would say to them is I think everyone should be taking a pause and reviewing their current situation, whether you're in tech or in any other sector. I would pause and look at my job. I would look at my industry. I would look at what do I think is going to happen and determine whether or not I will remain, whether it's by choice or not, in that space. And then I would do some serious thinking and working around how do I brand myself so that I am the strongest candidate out there? How do I develop the world's most, kick butt marketing strategy for myself? How do I use classical sales methodologies as I work through my job hunt? Like, all of that stuff should be things that people are looking to do now. And the advice I give people all the time is get ahead of it. Like, don't wait for your job to be fundamentally different, or don't wait till you get, unfortunately, some people are going to lose their jobs, right? They'll be displaced. Don't wait for that to happen. Strengthen your brand, strengthen your skill set now so that you're ahead of it, right? Either you find something new before yours gets changed, or if they're looking within your department and there's 10 people and only one will stay, maybe you will be then the one that stays because you've worked on yourself. You've developed your skills and you made yourself more competitive. That's what they need to be doing, because the reality is this fact really sticks in my head. Okay. 2/3 of leaders say they would prefer AI for productivity over their own staff. Okay, so that means if they can find an AI more productive than the human they have hired, whose family they're supporting through their compensation, they will choose AI. 2/3 are saying that today. And if you ask me my honest opinion, I honestly think the other third is not quite there yet, but they will be. Because I don't see a world where companies can compete effectively in a space where all of their competitors are more productive. It just becomes more difficult. Now, will some employ that as a strategy and use it as a point of differentiation? 100%. I have only humans. I don't have AI. I'm supporting us. You will 100% see that. But the reality is, you'll see the other side of it as well.
It's always kind of been, though, if you're a CEO, you're always trying to look, how can I maximize profits? You've always wanted to kind of automate if you have the ability to.
Of course.
Right. So, I mean, I guess the question is, just because CEOs want to do that, do they have the ability to do that?
Yeah. Well, they're already starting to do it. I mean, I think the fair question for me would be like, how far is it going to go? Because I expect and anticipate, I'm already starting to see what I was anticipating to see, which is the full opposite of the pendulum, right? Now, everyone's talking about AI and taking jobs and replacing jobs and all that. But then there is the other side of it, which is going to be, some folks being very vocal about the humans they have working for them. So I think an example of that is 11 Labs. I've seen that one recently where they're just talking about, okay, maybe you want to use this voice, but it's an actual human and we're paying them, so that's their value prop. I saw one just recently, again, just saying 100% human. So that's already, Jesse, like already that opposite spectrum of the, hey, bring back the humans is taking place before the full kind of launch of AI, mainstream launch of AI, because I think they're anticipating that there's going to be, some problems and issues. So where is that going to fit? How's it all going to integrate together? I don't really know, but you're probably going to see both sides of it, probably playing out at the same time, and probably going to see a blend of, fully folks that are fully going after AI as their productivity and folks integrating the human element into their value prop. That's my guess anyway.
Since we're discussing the article, "The Robot Stole My Internship, How Gen Z's Entry into the Workplace is Being Affected," and talking about how there's less jobs for Gen Z, basically at entry level. But I think what, one that doesn't really get talked too much about is just what major you go into. So then back to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York data. So this is the highest unemployment rate. Again, this is for the labor market for recent college graduates. So we're looking at the market for recent college graduates. The highest unemployment rate is anthropology, 9.4%, physics, basically 8%, computer engineering, 7.5%, commercial art and graphic design, 7.2%, fine art, 7%, sociology, 6.7%, computer science, 6.1%, chemistry, 6.1%, and then information systems and management, 5.6%, public policy and law is 5.5%, and then liberal arts, 5.3%. Yeah. Let's flip this down, though. Let's go to the ones that have the least. Those are the ones that have the highest.
Right, the lowest. Right. Yeah, what's
right?
The lowest?
So let's go to the opposite. Let's do the lowest. Okay, nutritional sciences, 0.4%. Construction services, 0.7%. Animal and plant sciences, 1%. Civil engineering, 1%. Special education, 1%. Agriculture, 1.2%. Early childhood education, 1.3%. Aerospace engineering, 1.4%. Nursing, everyone says we have a nursing shortage. We all know this, 1.4%.
Yeah.
Earth sciences, 1.5%. Mechanical engineering, 1.5%. Social services, 1.7%. And we'll go elementary education, 1.8%. So there's plenty of jobs where you're basically guaranteed to get a job. Anthropology, 9.4%. Maybe we don't need anthropologists, but it goes back to the computer engineering. There's just too many. The number doubled between 2010, 2022, the graduates. To me, is just an oversupply. And like nursing, is nursing going to be automated away anytime soon? And the fact is, like, I have a lot of friends that are nurses. You talk to them, you're like, what is the biggest task of your job? And they're like, the biggest task of my job is actually charting, which is basically just sitting behind a computer. And I'm like, well, do you think
that's automatable? 100%
right. I'm like,
automatable.
Right. But I was like, do you think that's automatable? They're like, a lot of times you're reading doctor's notes where you can't really read it. There's a lot of weird abbreviations. Also, we have all these HIPAA laws, and there's all these, like these privacy, different states have different regulations. And so they're like, even if you automated part of it away, like they've tried to do this in the past, and it actually just created more work. But I think a lot of it is just what major you choose. The liberal arts, you get an art history degree or something like that. I mean, based on this data here, you're gonna probably maybe not be unemployed, but you certainly have a much higher rate than the average. It really comes down to what degree should these Gen Zs go into?
Yeah. So that is a terrific question, and a lot of people are thinking about it. In fact, I'm working on that with my own kids, coaching them on what they need to be trying to figure out. And I got some little alphas here that I'm raising that are going to be in the same boat that the Gen Zs are in. No question about that. Um, I don't really say so much to go into one field or another because it's such a personalized thing. What I would do though is exactly what you just started doing, which is taking a look at the data to try to figure out what's going on in the different markets. Now, I don't know if you have availability to the trending of that data, because I would definitely look at trending versus a one data point, because one data point can be impacted by lots of things, right? So if you're seeing consistently anthropology going up as unemployment, or down in terms of the number of jobs available, that's one that you might want to look at a little bit more closely. So that's exactly what we recommend people do. Even as we're developing with Brand U and the course that we have, the very first two sections are all about figure out who you are, what you're all about, and what you want. That's a starting point. And then the second point is go and figure out which markets, like which types of jobs, job market, which markets or sectors within would be the ones that would make most sense. And then drill that down into which companies and all that. And as you're doing all of that, do analysis on them. Are they going to be here in 5 years from now? You can get a fairly good understanding of that if you're using skill-based models and those types of things. And then so that's how you figure out, okay, if in 5 years from now I want this type of work, this is the research I have to do today to confirm that that makes sense, right? So everyone has to manage their careers their own way. And that's what we recommend to do, is literally that research is, what are you all about? What do you want? Where might that fit in the market? Is that job still going to be there, et cetera? And again, that's what we teach in Brand U, because we feel like people need to understand how to do that.
Back to my kind of earlier question where I asked you on a scale of 0 to 10, how impactful AI would be, you said an 8 out of 10. And so a lot of your decision making process is going to be based from this 8.0. Let's just say hypothetically that it turned out that it was like a 1.0. I mean, how would that impact your decisions and your thought process? Would you recommend people acquire different skills? Would you recommend people do different Gen Z do different majors? Would you recommend that Gen Z focus on different skill sets entirely? Or what would your recommendation be if it turned out in 10 years from now that what we have right now is almost the peak of it, minus slight incremental gains? How would that change your process? Yeah.
You know what? That's an excellent question, because I think the answer is inherent to what the core goal, I would say, is in your career management. So the research will tell you whether or not you're an 8 or a 1 for your particular industry and role, right? Like, I'm just saying overall, I think it's going to be closer to, like, I don't know, 8. It's going to be pretty impactful, but not all roles are going to be impacted, right? And each one's going to be impacted differently. So the concept of figure out what you're good at, figure out what you want, take a look at what that market is actually doing, and whether or not that market is still conducive to your skill set and you can deliver value. That you just got to think of it that way. I mean, it's really difficult to tell people today, hey, don't go into this particular field, because it's going to be what that field looks like in 5 years from now. We could try to anticipate what it looks like. Then do your skills still fit there or no? That's the thinking that needs to be done. Right? It's too easy and too vague to just tell people, oh, go into the sciences or go into the maths or go into this, because it's just not how it should be thought of now. Now you got to look at your skills.
I just had Dr. Jeffrey Funk on, who is a computer scientist and professor, and he wrote an article recently talking about coders. And he basically said that there was a study that they looked at coders, and it turned out that they actually spend 19% more time when they were using AI to assist them. And the reason is because they had to spend more time prompting, consider the LLM suggestions, and most importantly, reviewing and debugging the code. And coding is only about 25% of their job. They still have a lot of other components that aren't automatable. To me, the main concern I have is if you're telling students this, or people believe this and they start changing their career path in anticipation, they might be doing careers they don't want to do or aren't necessarily good at because they felt kind of pushed into this because everyone's like, AI is taking that job out. Don't do that. Do this instead. And now you have a bunch
So
of,
you are saying
yeah.
exactly the right point. It's exactly the right point. Everyone has to do their own independent research. Okay, that's 100% it. Because you're right. You've got people saying, and they're saying big, broad, sweeping statements, right? And you're like, yeah, it's gonna Terminator movie is going to come to life, or the Wall-E movie is going to come, and that's going to be our reality. Probably not, right? Like, again, I'm not a specialist in where AI is going to go. I specialize more on the consumer and the behavior side of things. But I think the advice to do your research, figure out what you love, and do your research on the market and try to figure out where that market's going to be and if your skill set's going to match at the time you're going to be there. That's the exercise you do irrespective of AI. You need to do that. And that, again, that's what I teach my kids and I suggest to my students and everything, because we don't know in any world, we don't know what the job market's going to look in 5 years from now. So doing that research is good work for everybody to do. Now, how you anticipate what AI will do to those roles, that's a bit more of a question mark, right? So you may have some folks like me who say, I think those are going to change. You may have folks like yourself that say, I don't think they're going to change. People need to make their own call and they need to be comfortable with their own decisions, right? Feel what experts are saying, like read what experts are saying and interpret what does that mean for you. That's my suggestion and advice. Because there's no answer. It's in the future. We're not there yet. I don't know. Does that make sense to you? Because you and I think of them differently. I'd love to hear what you think. Does that make sense to you?
If you're going to university because you just want to get a broad education, I don't know, maybe you're a trust funder or your parents have money or you're not really too focused on making money, I think you just go for whatever you like. But I think
Sure.
the average person is probably not in a position. They might be looking at the ROI, the return on investment of their university degree. And do you want to pay $80,000 to study gender studies and have either no job or a really low paying job? Like, that doesn't mean that you're not actually learning anything or getting anything out of that degree, but what's the future potential of that degree? And I think it shows, like, with so many people going to university for like computer science, well, they think they're going to work for Google or Amazon or Apple and have this high paying job, and they probably saw videos of people back in the day where it's like, oh, this is my day at Google. I go sit in my beanbag chair, have a smoothie, have a matcha or whatever. Like, that was like the ZERP era. Those days are done. I kind of look back to one of my best friends, but she was like this really pretty Asian girl, and her parents told her that they would pay for her education, but if they paid for it, they got to choose what degree she was going to get. So she was like, okay, whatever. So she went for engineering and specialized in wastewater treatment. And the reason I mentioned that she was a pretty Asian girl is because there's that many pretty Asian women that are specializing in wastewater treatment plant. And basically, she has a high six-figure job with zero unemployment for her. And she told me she was so angry at her parents for so many years when she was going to school because she was studying shit, literally shit. And she's like, it was the best decision I've ever done. She's like, there's a lot of science, there's a lot of chemistry, highly interesting, and really good job prospects, etc. And so I think a lot of it is just, like the advice that I got when I was younger, as a lot of people did, which was basically follow your passion. Well, first off, your passion at 18 probably won't be your passion at 28, 38, 48, etc. So I think that's all awful advice.
I agree.
And again, it goes back to, what are you going to school for? Are you just going to school to get an education and learn and get the college experience? Or are you going to actually get a job that pays money? So if you're like, I want to get a good ROI on my degree, I want a high paying job, well, then you should probably look at some of the data, see what some of the trends are.
Yeah, exactly.
And I said, I think if we're looking at some of the trends, we kind of answer your question that, like, okay, like maybe some of these jobs might be taken away. Well, it goes back to like health. I don't think health is like, the population's getting older, which means that you're going to have more people that need health care. I would think anything, whether it's nursing, being a doctor, they say radiologist, one of the most replaceable jobs ever. You had, was it like Jeffrey Hinton who said that in 5 years, essentially radiologists would be replaced. Since he said that, there's actually more radiologists, right? Like I would be more concerned about outsourcing than I would be concerned about AI taking over. I think they're saying
it's replacement one way or another, right?
Yeah, it's replacement one way or the other. And I think that it's a lot better for Microsoft or one of these companies to be like, well, that's actually just AI. Because one, they're putting so much money into it. So it makes them look good. Like, hey, we're so technologically advanced versus like, actually, we just offshored your job to someone in Kenya.
Right.
So I
not
think
well viewed. Yeah.
Yes, the optics of it.
Yeah.
Versus like a nurse. I mean, the fact is, are you going to outsource the nurse? Even if you're outsourcing the charting, which again, I don't even know if that's possible due to HIPAA laws and privacy, things, whatnot. So I would just think if you're looking for jobs, I mean, find jobs that pay well.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're looking for money, find jobs that pay well that really can't be outsourced if you want to hedge your bets. And if you don't need the money and you just want to get an education, then who cares? Do what follow your passion, as they say, follow your passion.
Absolutely. So, you brought up something that is absolutely, emblematic of people who go into school, higher ed, and then they get out with their degrees, which is oftentimes they do what you just said, which is follow your passion. Like I love, let's say, the arts, or I love this, or I love that. And they go in and they study it and they learn a lot about it and they become proficient. But then they get out and go, oh no, there's no jobs in this space. Well, I'll start by saying that can be avoided irrespective of AI. Okay. So this conversation we're having about figure out what you like, try to check where the market's going to go and see if it's going to meet your goals. That should be done with all people who are entering into higher ed, not just, those that are concerned about AI. Because then you avoid the, what do I do now? I just invested 80 grand in 4 years of my life and I can't find the work I want. You should know that going in. That's just poor planning and poor preparation. That's kind of on you, is my point. You could have done your research. You could have looked to see, oh boy, there's no jobs here. Oh wait, it does not make the kind of money I want. You should know that before you even start. That's why, I'm pushing so hard. Plan early, right? Like plan ahead of time so that you know what it is that you're getting into. The other thing, I just wanted to comment on nursing because I think that one's a fascinating field. This concept of they really do two things. They do a lot of things. Nursing is an incredibly important profession. Okay. Very important. But I'm just going to talk about two things that they do. One is charting, and it takes up almost all of their time. The other thing is patient care. Okay. If you think of what AI can do that would be really positive, it would be something like this. Watch. You've got your nurse who goes in on a regular day. She spends most of her day charting, a little bit of time with patient care. Let's assume she can use AI, same nurse, she or he, they can use AI. And if we're charting, let's say they find ways to keep it confidential, no HIPAA violation, blah, blah, blah. They find a way. Like they got those little things that note take and maybe they can do all the charting. I don't know what the solution is. Let's say they find one and it meets the rules. That means the 85% of her time she was spending charting, she can spend that time on patient care, right? Empathy, taking care of them physically, listening to their problems, all of the stuff that patients get a lot of value out of nursing. She or he can do a lot more of that, right? If they're not spending all their time charting. Or the hospital might say, I actually only need 2 nurses, not 7. That's another option that could happen. But I just wanted to talk about that one particularly because it is a really interesting field. So going back to your question, what should they do when they go into school? Figure out what you want to get out of it. Don't make an $80,000 investment without a very clear idea of what your ROI is going to be coming out of it.
In the nursing example, I don't necessarily know, like I said, due to just all the regulations and whatnot, even if they had the technology, if they could actually automate that away. But if they did, because like the nurses I talked to, they're basically saying your first point, which is like, yeah, that's just going to mean I have more time to spend with the existing patient. Theoretically, but it's like, well, I would imagine it's not that would be not what's going to happen. What would happen is be like what you're just saying. Okay, we got 100 nurses at this hospital, and 85% of your time is spent charting. Let's just get rid of 85% of them, so we'll have 15 nurses. Or what I think would be more likely, what would happen would be like, let's actually get rid of 95% of them offload more of this to the CNAs that are making a fraction what the nurses are making,
Yep.
and maybe have. And I think you kind of saw this with like the when I was in university over 20 years ago, because I have like a exercise science major, so I had a lot of my classmates went to be like a PA, a physician assistant, or went to be like a PT, physical therapist, kind of like the two most common ones.
Yep.
And what happened was a lot of them would graduate as a physical therapist, and what was happening at this point is the PTAs were coming up, or a physical therapy assistant. So what would happen is that say a clinic would hire a couple physical therapists, and
Yep.
they would do the intake, write the rehab for the client, for the patient, and then at that point they really wouldn't see the patient anymore. You would then have the PTA that would come in and
Yeah.
execute and
The plan.
actually
Yes,
the plan.
exactly.
Right. And I think that, and then of course every once in a while the physical therapist would check in, see how the progress was going,
Mhm.
whatnot. And you kind of saw that same thing with in the medical field. Like you have nurse practitioners, and you have PAs that are actually essentially doing the work that the doctors were doing. So you're basically having to pay less doctors and kind of offloading some of the responsibility. I mean, I've had times where I've like back in the day when I would go to see a doctor, and you look at the name tag and it's just they're not even a doctor. You're like, so do I get like do I get a discount on my bill, as I'm not actually seeing the doctor? But I mean, a lot of people, they think they're going to a doctor, and they're not. They're going to a PA, or they have a nurse
Right.
practitioner or something that are
Yeah.
actually, examining them. And not that they doesn't mean that they're bad. I'm not saying that doesn't mean that they're incompetent, but it just means you're
So
paying
maybe
them
not
less.
your expectations.
Right. But
Right.
I think that would be, in the case of the nurse, I think that would be the case. Like you just end up having more CNAs, and you'd have less nursing, and they would find a way to, all that profit would just end up going to the top, and you wouldn't, the patient, the customer would not get better care. They
Right.
would get the exact same amount of time with the nurse, and the
Yeah.
charting would just be offloaded to. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, I would think you'd even have like, you probably just have you'd have more IT staff at the hospital than you would probably
Yeah,
nursing.
you could. You very well
Right,
could.
which be the way I would think it.
I'd
Yeah.
love to see, like specifically in nursing in a couple of fields, I'd love to see smart companies doing research on their own before, or institutions, before they go and execute these plans. I would love to see a hospital. Let's just use a hospital as an example. Let's say you take two different departments, and in your two different departments, one, you keep your nursing, like let's assume they have AI now, right? And now their charting is gone. One of them, you'll use this charting model that you just talked about. You reduce the staff, and the AI is doing the charting, and she's got the same time for patient care. Okay. And in the second model, the one you compare it against, you take out all the charting for AI, but you leave him to do all of the patient care. He still stays, but now he's doing a lot more patient care. I'd love to see both of those models researched against one another to see what it actually does to patient care. Do they see an improvement in patient care? Do they get better faster? Did they get better overall than if they didn't have more nursing support? Like, I'd actually like to see that. I'd love to see it, because I think for me, it could uncover some really neat things about what nurses and other humans can do on the side of, empathy and all that, that the bots can't do, right? And I'd love to see how much impact that's having on people and on their progression, in the medical space. But probably won't happen, but I'd love to see it. If you see that happening, you tell me, because I want to watch it.
And Melise, kind of the last big topic before we wrap this up, just because I think you're going to have a much better perspective as someone that's actually working with Gen Zs at the university level. But there's this narrative out there that a lot of the Gen Zs are difficult to work with. There's a survey of 1,000 hiring managers that 40% admitted biases against Gen Z applicants. Another survey found that 58% of employers say recent college graduates are unprepared for the workforce. And 30% said they had to fire a Gen Z worker within a month of their start date. Some of the consensus was because college enrollment was down 15% between 2010 and 2021, that a lot of college administrators had to focus on retention and graduation rates, which meant keeping students happier. So you had grade inflation
Mm.
and whatnot. And so I talked to some of my friends that supervise Gen Zs, and they're like, yeah, they're pretty entitled, which I think is always kind of like, I think a 20-year-old always thinks they know better. So when someone says that, I don't
They do,
necessarily,
don't they?
right. So I don't necessarily know. But then I was kind of looking at like, well, who has the most HR complaints and things like that. And apparently Gen Z files HR complaints at a much higher rate, even more so, it seemed like, because there's not a whole lot of good data on it. And we all know that if you complain to HR, well, you might as well kiss your job goodbye. Like HR is not there to protect the employee. They're there to protect the company, not to get sued. And, it's called human resources. They're managing the resource, which is human, which is you, from suing them. So but as someone that actually works as a professor at a university, so you're around Gen Zers and you talk to employers, like what's your kind of synopsis on this as someone that has firsthand experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is, and I think you would agree, every generation thinks the one that's next is lazier than theirs, right? And I don't know of any generations like, wow, that generation works harder than ours. That just doesn't happen. So I think that's just a foundational reality. But there's some unique things happening to Gen Z, or has happened to Gen Z, that maybe makes it a little bit more pronounced. So let me give you an example. I actually wrote an article on this, and it was on a mini series related to the cost of living crisis and the societal impacts and the behavioral impacts that have come out of it. And one of the things that we're seeing is, because the cost of living is so high and right, like salaries have not gone up to match, that it's becoming very difficult for people to kind of get started in their lives. So we're seeing this concept of delayed adultification, which is basically saying, if in the past, folks were adults at 18 or 21 or whatever we consider it to be, then they're adults. They're making their decisions. They're out in the workforce. They're getting their own places, and they're independent. Because of the cost of living crisis, we're seeing more people staying home longer. Folks that are still at home in their late 20s because they can't afford to live on their own. Well, that's not quite living on your own. Even if you're independent in your own home, you're still not doing all the responsibilities and things you would normally be doing. So the delayed adultification and some of the other impacts of cost of living crisis and all the things that Gen Z is dealing with, they were younger in COVID. There's a lot of things that are contributing to it. So that's probably why you're seeing employers come back to say, not quite what I want. On the flip side of that, though, we are still seeing I'm seeing excellent students who are working very, very hard. There's always going to be the one or two that love to nap in class. That's every year, every class, right? I shouldn't say nap, but you know what I mean. There's one or two that's always just a little bit more distracted, but the students are still excellent. They're handing in their work on time and they're doing what they need to be doing. So, I mean, I think we're seeing multiple sides of that, depending on who you are and where you're at.
What do you think about ChatGPT being used in class? Because that was also like, kind of the article that I was referencing. That was also kind of one of the things as well, where it's like, okay, well, you get a lot of these college graduates where they just use chat the whole time. Who even knows how much they actually learned? Like, how long have you been teaching? Were you teaching kind of before chat and before the pandemic? Is it like pretty noticeable before chat, after chat?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're starting to see, obviously, adoption of chat and basically all sorts of different AI tools, but chat being a big one, right? The LLMs. We're seeing a lot of it in, work submission or research or those types of things. Every school is still trying to figure out what they want to do. But I heard something recently, you've probably heard it as well, is, we're at risk of having the next generation sound the smartest, but be the dumbest of all generations. And that's because they will be able to, and have already figured out how to sound very smart using, chat and other language models. But they don't necessarily do the work that's required behind it to make sure their own intelligence level has matched what they're outputting, right? So you're seeing that already. And folks in academia are really focused on making sure that our assessments of students is fair, but that we're assessing them, not their ability to write good prompts. Now, will we see that potentially enter into curriculum over time? It's quite possibly, right? Like how to use AI as a class, as a course, or even in orientation or something. I don't know. Something will likely be there. But it is the future. At least I think it is. I don't think it's going to go away. It's kind of like when the internet came up, you can't put it back in a box. So how do we prepare them, right? Like, how do we prepare them to use it ethically, not just replace their own thinking, but enhance their thinking? How do we teach them how to do that? How do we evaluate them? I mean, I was just teaching a class recently where they wanted to do something different than an in-person written exam. I was like, you know what, I'm up for it. Let's do something different. So I had them do a project, but then they had to come into the class and each one had 30 minutes to defend their project against whatever questions I felt the need to ask. And I did specifically to detect how much they actually understood versus how much did they use AI. And it's noticeable. Those that really understood their work versus those that didn't. And you're just going to keep seeing more of that, I think, as time goes on. We got to push them to make sure that they are the ones that are smart. They're not just sounding smart.
I was reading an article where I was saying how this person asked their AI agent to order the cheapest eggs, and then it ended up being like $30 some because they came on like Uber Eats or something like that, or one of those services. So maybe the eggs were cheap, but the actual processing fee, the service fee, taxes, whatever, it ended up being like $30. And then they were saying, though, in the future, we're going to have to be worried about maybe you tell the AI agent to get coffee, bring it back to you as fast as possible.
Right.
And it jumps into a car, cuts off a few people and speeds, crashes a car because it's trying to get this coffee to you
Absolutely.
fast. But then I'm thinking, like, how far, like, do you really think that we're going to have an AI robot getting you coffee in 5 years from now or 10 years? I mean, I think like the leap we're going from ChatGPT to an actual fully functioning robot. And then if that's the case, I mean, the last of my worries is the robot getting you coffee. If that's the technology we have, I would be worried about way worse things like human enslavement and all sorts of things if this robot is so advanced. And I also wonder just like the novelty on this stuff. Like, yeah, this stuff's kind of fun. I hear people now they're dating their AI boyfriend or girlfriend.
Right.
I'm sure they're just having like, I remember when AOL chat came out, like, yeah, you spent time on it. It was cool. It was new. And then after a while, 6 months, you got bored of it. You never went on it again. And I kind of think like it's fun to mess around with some of these things, but we're a far cry from the AI robot cutting people off to get you a cup of coffee. And if we're that advanced, why isn't the robot just pulling out some coffee maker in its own, biome or something? I mean,
here you go.
Right. I mean, this is like the Jetsons or something. I'm like, it seems to me like I like the path to that. I mean, come on, we're not at Skynet. I mean, people need to pump the brakes on some of this stuff.
Yeah, possible. Absolutely possible. It's hard to say how quickly things will move. But it is moving, and it is moving relatively quickly. So it'll be interesting to see. And you're right. Not everyone's going to want to adopt the technology, and that's true for all tech fields, right? You got some people who are complete Luddites; they just don't want anything. And then you got folks that have 3 AI tools running in the background, like I do. I always got AI tools working for me in the background, and you get a lot more productive that way. So everyone's going to be a little bit different. But I do. My guess is we are going to see a fairly meaningful change in the next 5 to 10 years, and my guess is based on the research that's currently available. Right, all of the research we see right now is pointing in that direction, but research it's not always perfect. But I do believe that it's hitting the nail on the head on this one.
My fiance's in her 40s, and she supervises, I don't know, maybe a dozen people that are basically all exclusively Gen Zers, all have college degrees. Okay. And she's always shocked at how poor their computer skills are. Is again, and I think maybe the first time you were on, we talked about this, but it's like where I had David Sachs on, not the famous David Sachs that works for the president, but David Sachs that wrote a book on how analog will be the future. But like he mentioned in this podcast, which is like, yeah, I have a kid. He's always on his phone and his computer. You know what he's doing? He's playing Candy Crush and he's watching TikTok. Like he's not changing the world. And that's the thing is, I know how to use ChatGPT to write a paper. But as someone that actually works with Gen Zs, how do you think that education will change? Because if you're just going to do a regurgitation test or regurgitation paper with ChatGPT, that probably changes how you want to analyze how much information the student learned. And then are these kids really advanced at computers? And and technology because they are around it?
So I'll start with the first part. I would say most of the time in the classroom, like when we develop our courses, normally they're developed in a way that you're evaluating in more than one manner, right? Like if you do only multiple choice exams, you're really just saying, did you memorize things well enough, right? That's basically kind of what it does. It can play a role in evaluation, but certainly not looking. It really won't help discern whether or not the student really understood something. Okay. So there's usually more than one method. And so you'll see teachers, especially in higher ed profs, you'll see them give different types of projects or different types of evaluation methods to see, do they really actually understand? Because you are 100% correct. If somebody just knows how to regurgitate what they heard or just tell me what I've told you, that's not enough. They need to understand it and they need to know how to apply it. So evaluation methods are typically centered more around that. So that would hopefully alleviate some of the concerns around, hey, we're just pumping out a bunch of stupid people who know how to use ChatGPT, right? I gave you the example of what I just did in my classroom to make sure, like, do you actually get it or not, right? We do that level of depth to make sure the students are well equipped. So I hope that answered the first part of your question. Did it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
we're good.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. We can't just tell me back what I told you. Like, more often than not, we're looking for them to take what we've given them and elevate it quite a few notches. And, I just spent my last year here with Laurier, and the students were outstanding, super smart. And I knew it wasn't ChatGPT because oftentimes I have to do it right there in front of the classroom, right in front of everybody without a lot of prompting or prep. They just have to do it. So good students. So that was the first question. I don't remember the second one.
the whole digital native thing. Just because you grew up with technology, does that mean? I guess I'm asking you. Like, does that mean that you are really good at it?
No, of course not.
And what? Yeah, and what does that even mean? Like, yeah, are you good at watching TikTok? Or are you good at? So
Right.
I guess
Absolutely.
the question is like everyone. I always hear like, oh, they're young, they're good at technology. Whatever that even
The
means.
better way to interpret that is they can likely adapt or adopt more quickly than people who were not digital natives. I think that might be the better way to think about it. Just because you were born in an era of technology does not mean you are good at technology. The only way anyone, whether you were born there or not, could get good at it is through learning about it and practicing. No different than anybody else. They don't come basically into the world knowing how to run ChatGPT. Okay, they don't. Like, just like everybody else. It's just that because they were around things like this from day one of their lives, they can quickly adopt. They're like, oh, I get that, I get that, I get that. Whereas people like me who, I'm a Zennial, right? So I was, born in the not complete non-digital. Yes, that old. And then grew up in the slight digital. So in that Zennial space, there's my kids, for example, there's probably a Zennial version of that for them because they were born with no AI and they're going to be, raised in a world of AI. So yeah, so I think we just go back to the basics always when it comes to this type of stuff. And there's no right answer. People just have to figure out what's right for them.
So let's just say hypothetically, or not hypothetically, since you're one of these Gen Zs that are graduating university, trying to find jobs, we're talking about a shrinking job market for these Gen Zers. What should they do? Is there any techniques you would have for how to apply for jobs? I hear about like, some person applied for 5,000 jobs and didn't get hired. And my thought process is like, well, it's, quantity or quality. Did you just half-ass these 5,000 jobs, not actually, yes. If you're applying for that many jobs, it seems like, of course, you won't get hired at any one of them because you never even got past the first filter, the first algo, which they've been using for decades. So that, years, I guess I should say, but that doesn't really tell me anything. Right. But like, what advice would you have for a Gen Zer applying for a job that's already graduated? Is there any techniques? And then just what skill, if they are having a difficult time finding a job, what skills should they acquire? And then also, how do you demonstrate that you have those skills?
Yeah, that is a terrific question. One that my team and I have done so much research on this exact question because it actually happens to be the basis of the startup that I founded, Brand U. So I'll explain to you what my advice would be. So I would think about it. I would think about your career as an end-to-end system. Okay. And think about your career management as an end system, specifically even to getting a job like today for like a Gen Zer, for example. You start your first start is figuring out who you are as a brand. You need to do that work. That's your job. What is my brand, my personal brand? What do I bring to the table? So you first start by figuring out, what are you interested in? What kind of work do you like? What are your strengths? What's your skill set? Then you figure out what type of industries are looking for what I'm selling. Because at the end of the day, you're a product. You're delivering a service, and you're going to get comp for your service. No different than if you go grocery shopping and you want to buy a can of pop, you got to pay money for that. It's the same exact thing. You're doing this here, but you're selling your services and skill sets. Okay. So the first thing they need to do is figure out what they're all about, what they like, and where would they most likely be able to add value in the market. Okay. So that helps them figure out what type of industries they want to be doing the application for. They want to pull together and actually link up my skills and what they're looking for, because opposite to what your friend is doing, that precision work of going, you have a need, I have a skill set, let's match these together. That's what they should be doing, not casting the net out to thousands and thousands. It's actually the opposite. You start with thousands and you bring it quickly down, and then you focus and do a really, really good job on marketing and selling for the short list of companies that you have selected for yourself. Okay. So it's not all about going, I'm going to apply to everywhere, because each application, in order to get through those bots that you were talking about, the ATS, and then get to the people, it's a lot. It's a lot of work to get through to people. And you do so by showing them through your sales materials, like your marketing tools, like your resume and your LinkedIn and all that. You show them how your skill set will meet their need. So if you're just throwing out thousands of resumes, you're doing that 0 times. 0 times. No one's going to want this generic thing you're putting out there, because they have options of people who are showing them how they could actually solve their problem. So the first part is branding. Brand yourself. Find out what companies need what you're selling. Okay. The second part is marketing. You need to think about your job search as a marketing and sales initiative, because it 100% is. How can people find you if you're not out there pushing yourself? Just applying to what shows up on Indeed on a daily basis, you will be doing that for a really long time before you actually hit something that might be interesting. And even then, it might not even be a good fit. Okay. Truly. That's truly how it works. So you want to market yourself. You want to think about LinkedIn as your content hub. Push out content on LinkedIn all the time. Relevant content. Show your area of expertise and skill. Build a personal portfolio site for yourself. When you email a company to ask for an interview, send them to your personal profile site. Here, you can look a little bit about me. Put some videos on there. Do whatever you got to do to make sure you're marketing yourself and your brand as strongly as possible. The last thing you want to do is you want to think about the finding the job part and the landing the job as the sales process. So you want to do everything you would do in a sales call. Like you're prepping for a sales call. You find out about who's going to be there. You set your objectives. You find out what your narrative is, what your key points are. You do all that in prep for a sales call. You do all that in prep for an interview. You find out about who's interviewing you. You learn something about them. Learn how to handle negotiations. Learn how to handle objections. Learn how to close. Learn how to network. All of that stuff that we do in marketing and sales, that's what they got to do, because it's so much more competitive, so much harder to break through. If you don't do it strategically, there's a good chance someone else will, and it'll get ahead of you.
Melise Panetta has been our guest today, the founder of Brand You, which we talked quite a bit about today. Melise is also a marketing lecturer at a university in Canada at the Lazarita School of Business. Just 2 final questions. Where can people find you, find your company, Brand You, some of your research? And then secondly, leave us with a final thought related to this podcast.
So you can find me at www.brandupro.ca. Here's my closing thought. So I've been talking about this quite a bit with a lot of folks. Okay. My closing thought would be the following: whether you believe AI is going to transform, entry level or more in the future or not, it never hurts to get prepared and get ahead of things. It's certainly not going to be a waste of time to stop and think about your career. So every time I talk with this about people, most folks go, I probably should start this. Okay. Some people are going to, large majority will not. Okay. A lot of people just kind of have it as a nagging thing in the back of their mind until something happens to them. Strongest advice I can give to everybody, encapsulate it all, is get on it now. Prepare yourself now so that you are coming out the other end as a stronger, candidate, a stronger employee, somebody who's going to have a really good career that makes them happy. So that's my advice. Plan and think about your career as strategically as you think about whatever you're doing in your career.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.